I think because their metric system is just, it's three things. So if outside of those three things, they don't consider themselves bad, where it's like, because there's so little things on that list, it's pretty easy to check them off. Now that we're talking about it, I'm thinking about my male clients, and not one of them has shown up and been like, I'm exhausted. And every single one of my female clients show up and they're like, I'm exhausted. Every single one.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. That was Alli Rizacos. Alli is the founder of Alli Rizacos Coaching, and she is the Imposter Syndrome coach. And in our conversation, we talk about something that I think afflicts all of us in sales at one time or another, and that is the imposter syndrome. So we start off the conversation as Alli shares what the imposter syndrome is and who it is most likely to affect. We explore the 5 different archetypes, if you will, of imposters or imposter syndrome, and you may recognize yourself as we explore what each of these are. For example, like the perfectionist, who's always afraid that they aren't measuring up to expectations, even when they are. And then we dig into how Alli works with people to help them overcome this challenge. So we get into all this and much, much more. But before we get to Alli, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. And if you subscribe, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could leave us a review and give us your feedback about how we're doing. So thank you. All right, let's jump into it. Alli, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Andy.
It's a pleasure to have you. So you're not up in the frozen north where you usually live. You are somewhere else now.
Yeah, not where my LinkedIn says. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Right.
I actually, funny enough, I was updating my company page, and it was saying, "Where do you live?" And I just put the beach for now. I couldn't bring myself to say Toronto, which I'm originally from, but I'm currently in Hilton Head, South Carolina, living by the beach.
Yeah, sure, doing like an extended tryout of the digital nomad lifestyle. Is that
basically
fair?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I mean, you've sampled lots of different places recently.
Mm-hmm. Ever since I left corporate, so I left corporate March 30th, 2020.
Yeah.
And basically May 15th, I started traveling. So my parents live in New York, so I went to New York for a bit. Then we went to Denver. Then we did Hawaii. Went back to Toronto for a little bit. And then I did Costa Rica for a couple months. And
Nice.
Yeah, which was beautiful and lovely. Then went back to Toronto for like 12 days. And we originally came to Hilton Head for New Year's. So my brother's in-laws have a place here, so we often come for New Year's. Mm-hmm. So New Year's was obviously December 31st. We were supposed to go back January 11th, and we're still here. We just keep extending it.
And why not, right?
It's
because what
like
faces
summer
you back
today.
Yeah, what faces you back in Toronto is not summer.
And what I've learned from all these travels is that your environment really does matter. Like, it really does put you in a different state, you know?
And so of all the places you've been, if you could say, okay, I'm just going to go stay, where would that be?
There's so much, like, I loved Denver, but it has winter. So I'm like, I'm out. I'm doing that. Hawaii.
Yeah. No winter in Hawaii.
Yes, no winter in Hawaii. Hawaii is magical, but there's like a little lack of entertainment. Like, people, like 8 p.m., everything is shut down, you know? And that's okay. I can honestly go to bed at 10 p.m., but...
Well, here's the secret, though. So you weren't in Honolulu.
Yes, exactly. I was in Maui. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So maybe in Honolulu would be different. That's true.
I mean, my wife and I go multiple times a year, typically to Hawaii, not so much, obviously, the last couple of years. And we've got to the point, we spent a lot of time in Maui and Kauai and love Maui and Kauai, but we actually find we really enjoy Honolulu.
For the action?
Yeah, we've become members of the Honolulu Museum of Art and
nice.
all these other things. It's just like, it's just sort of one of the most diverse cities, I think, in the United States. And we just like it a lot.
I've never been to Honolulu. I've never been to that island. I've done Maui and Big Island, basically. But
There's
I think
your tip.
there, yeah, but perfect. I'll book the next flight.
Okay.
But I think what you just said about, like, we're members of the museum there, or I think the important piece in that is, like, you need to find your community, right?
Mm.
And so when I was in Costa Rica is really when I started to find my community. And that's really what kind of this traveling has been about for me, is finding a community of people that are kind of focused on the same thing, like building their own businesses and trying to design and create a life that really, like, lights them up and makes them feel alive. Right. So leaving Costa Rica was, bittersweet. And Hilton Head, listen, is like so calm and quiet. I have no external stressors. Like, there's no noise pollution, there's no light pollution. Like, it's so peaceful, but also lack of action, lack of community, right? Like we were joking about before, it's Del Boca Vista down here, like Vista, right? I am the youngest person they've ever seen,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So I would say Costa Rica, because, like, so I'm going back, and, like, one of my best friends will be there. Another girl that I met while I was there is also going to be there. Like, so many of us are kind of coming back together and meeting there. And, like, that's the nice part,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, very cool. All right. Yeah. Well, you have to keep us posted on your year.
LinkedIn will keep you posted.
Yeah. On your travels. Yeah. We'll stalk you there. So you are the imposter syndrome coach. So
wow.
Well, hey, that's what your LinkedIn title says. So, I mean, it's like, if it says it on LinkedIn,
it's real.
It's real, right? So, let's dig into that. So, I mean, very interesting positioning is first of all, may I just tell people, they may know, perhaps they think they know what the imposter syndrome is, but tell us what that is.
Yeah. So how it's kind of clinically defined, if you will, is incessant thoughts, negative thoughts about how you aren't successful despite clear evidence that you are successful. So kind of really acting like, feeling like a fraud, like, oh my God, like, I'm not good enough. Someone's going to find out I shouldn't have this job and I'm going to get fired, type of thinking.
So feeling like you're not as competent perhaps as others think you are.
Yeah. And one thing I do want to say to make a distinction of is, like, what I want to break the stigma about is, it's not something that you, like, have. Like, people are like, oh, I have that. It's something that you feel. Like, it's not like, you don't have to be cured of imposter syndrome. Like, you're not broken. Like, it's a collection of thoughts, and it's something that you feel, So,
okay. Well, that makes sense. How is it most often manifested? I mean, I've had my own struggles with it, but from time to time, but yeah, typically for most people, how's it sort of manifest? How they sort of say, oh gosh, this is what's working at me.
Yeah. Well, I think it's like the magnitude, the loudness, and the consistent negative self-talk, right? Like, it's overbearing, and it's so much louder than anything else in your head, right? And it kind of, like, spirals you into this vortex of not feeling good enough, and then your confidence gets shot, and then you don't show up as, with conviction and whatnot. And, in the corporate setting, so all my clients are in the corporate setting, it can look like not the biggest, but one of the ones that always comes up is, like, it can look like being afraid to speak up in a meeting for fear of saying something stupid. I was like, that seems so innocuous, but, like, huge, right? It can feel like not going for a promotion because you don't think you're good enough for it, right?
Right.
Another big one is overworking, because you're constantly trying to prove that you're meant to be there and you're smart enough and you're good enough. So you, like, take on more and say yes to more things. And so you're totally overworked and totally overexhausted. And what happens is you stop prioritizing yourself and your needs. And every single time I have a new client, they're just like, I'm exhausted. And I'm like, oh, I know.
Yeah.
It's exhausting to try to, like, prove yourself, thinking that you need to prove yourself constantly,
Yeah, I was doing some research in preparation for this, and came across this article this woman wrote that said there are 5 types of imposter syndrome, if you will, and one of them was just as you described, the superwoman/superman, is that people convinced that they have to work harder and harder to measure up because they're convinced they're inadequate, right?
Yeah.
They're convinced they're phonies.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, I mean, this is something we all suffer from some degree
Always.
at some point, right?
For
I mean,
sure.
I remember when I was writing my first book, and this was, I don't know, 10 plus years ago at this point, and was in New York City and Manhattan and was looking for a quiet place to write. And the city has these writing rooms. You can go in and they're basically quiet spaces where you subscribe, become a member, and then you walk in and you just grab an empty desk or a soft chair or couch somewhere and write. And so you had to sign in. And so I remember signing in and looking at some of the names on the sign-in, it's like, holy shit, these are real authors here.
Yeah.
I recognized 2 screenwriters, one famous movie director, some other novelists and I'm like, I'd never written anything before. And I was like, I'm just writing my little sales book.
Yeah.
It's just like, it felt like, huge imposter in that scenario.
Yeah. I'm curious, are there times in your life where you haven't felt it? Where like maybe you think you should have felt it, or, it would be commonplace to feel it, but you're like, no, I feel really confident in what I'm doing and who I am.
Yeah. I think sort of the underlying thing for me is I have sort of this baseline of optimism that sort of carries me through. That's like, even if things are really bad, they'll be better and they'll be okay. That sort of has informed my outlook in life. But there are definitely moments where, for me, a lot of times it's triggered by other people who it appears on the surface that everything's easy for them. Right. And then you're thinking, well, what's wrong with me? Right. Is like early in my sales career, because I'm relatively introverted in social situations, people who just seem to be able to make it really easy to strike up conversations with strangers and so on. And I was just like, that's
not me. So I guess I'm never going to be as successful, right?
Yeah. Well, I started writing about it in this latest book, but it was a way to go and work your way through that pretty easily. But it does strike you.
There was a Simon Sinek video that I shared the other day that was talking about exactly what you just said, right? As leaders, it's so important. Like the theme for the talk was around authenticity and I guess courageous authenticity, right? And it's so important for leaders to like let their team know, like when they're not okay, like when things are hard for them, like when they don't have it all together. Because I think as leaders, we often think like, got to have it all together, got to make it look easy, got to be perfect, and that is kind of what can breed imposter syndrome, right? Is because what happens is, as if you're giving that perception to your team, right, as a leader, that to be a leader, you need to have it all together and never show any weakness. Now your team's like, well, clearly, I can't do that. Like I'm a mess inside. How would I ever be as perfect as that, right? And so then they think that they're never going to be as successful because they can't be like that, right? So to me, like authentic leadership is like literally letting people know, like when you're not okay, and that it's okay to not be okay.
Well, and along with that, I would add is it's okay to let people know what you don't know.
Yes.
Because
that you're not perfect.
That you're not perfect. And I think this goes hand in hand. I think this is, in my estimation, this is one of the real problems with sales leadership. And this is not a new issue. I think it's been exacerbated recently by, I don't know, just the environment perhaps. But
well, you kind of only get a snapshot of someone when you're on Zoom calls, right? You can kind of perform on the call.
Well, there's that. But I think one of the things that's, I sort of first really noticed this when I started my consulting business 20 plus years ago. And when I first got started with the business, I was marketing my services to VPs of sales, chief sales officers. No one called themselves chief revenue officer at that time, and I wasn't having much success. And what sort of finally dawned on me was, these people are all afraid to go to the CEO and say, I need help.
Yeah.
To a person. because the assumption is that if you carry the title,
got it all together.
You've got it all together. You know everything.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, people try to live up to that. Right. So I think there's so many changes we need to make in the way we structure sales organizations and leadership around them. And one that I give oftentimes is, if you ever watch the show Billions.
I haven't, but I've heard much about it.
So one of the key characters there in this hedge fund trading firm is on staff is one of the sort of principals of the firm is a psychiatrist.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that
Brilliant.
Everything we've read about mental health and mental well-being within sales organization in particular is you don't need to have a very big sales team, I think, in order to justify having somebody on retainer at a minimum, if not on staff, a psychologist of sort, to help sellers, because this is a performance-based profession. And if you draw the parallels to professional sports.
Of course, performance-based.
They have performance-based. They have staff psychologists. They have people they call on. That's just one example. I've got others.
Well, and it would be insane for any sports team to not have a coach.
Not have a psychologist, right? That type of sport, right?
Yeah.
So in sales, though, we put people in charge who have no grounding in performance improvement, nothing about psychology. And this is not a criticism. This is a position we put them in, and they're assumed that they are experts in, well, how do I motivate people? Or how do I help somebody improve their performance in a way that's more scientifically driven perhaps than just by anecdote based on your own experience? And as a result, though, they feel like, well, I must be the expert in that because I hold that title. So I can't ask to bring somebody in to help.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this has been my forever struggle with leadership, right? Because I feel like the problem is so obvious. Like what you just described, I mean, is like no one gets leadership training. People are thrusted into leadership because they were the top performer, right? And as a top performer, you are inherently very you focused, right? To be a top performer, you got to be working on your craft, thinking about you, right? Of course, you're maybe collaborating with people. Obviously, that's a part of it, but your motivation is you as an individual contributor, right? And then tomorrow, you're a leader for people, and now your motivation needs to come from somewhere else because it's not about you anymore. You're never going to get the accolades and the award. No one's going to shout you out, right? How does someone's motivation and drive change overnight?
Well, to your point, we don't give the people the tools to handle those jobs. Yeah. I say this, we collectively. I mean, obviously there are exceptions in larger organizations that have more well-established leadership training and management training. But by and large, unless you're one of those big companies, which most people aren't working for those large companies, they don't get this. And so that's why I feel horrible for frontline managers who are thrust into these high pressure jobs, especially, we're seeing increasingly in the tech world where the tenure of everybody within the sales organization is basically about a year.
Yeah. No one's ever hit their zone of excellence. When they do, get a new job, get promoted
they
to
go
something you don't
somewhere.
know.
And instead of doubling down and learning more, they jump somewhere.
Yeah.
And I wonder sometimes too, whether that desire to jump is sort of based on the idea that I need to go before people really find out who I am.
Maybe. I think the other thing too that I think about is the reasons sometimes people get into leadership. Are you doing it because it's really, you're passionate about leading others, or are you doing it because it's just what you're supposed to do because that's the next thing of climbing the ladder?
Well, I think there's certainly some of that. If it's not laid out for people clearly that, hey, there's a career here for people that just want to be individual contributors. And I think more and more people are comfortable with that role. I mean, certainly in the tech world, you see more of that. People have been, senior account execs, or in some cases, they want the companies maybe to reward them with titles and so on as they deal with bigger and bigger accounts, but they're still fundamentally individual contributors.
Yeah.
I think that's great, but I think companies need to do a better job of spelling out what that path looks like.
Totally.
So if you don't want to be a manager, left behind, but as as taking on bigger accounts, specific types of accounts, whatever, that enrich the career of the individual.
Yeah. Yeah. It can't just be leadership.
Yeah.
Because it's really not for everyone. You have to really, really like people first and foremost. And you have to really, really be motivated by other people's success and the impact that you can make on other people.
Exactly. And I think that is unfortunately sort of the missing piece. Because if you put people who are inexperienced on those jobs, who don't understand these fundamentals about how to really work through other people and help other people succeed to become the best version of themselves, then you get the scenario we oftentimes see in some companies where the frontline managers just rely on managing by activity and metrics.
Yes, exactly.
And because that's something that's clear to them.
Easy.
They get it. I can grasp that. I can grasp these numbers. You're not making enough calls.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Make more calls.
Yeah. And that then becomes the solution to everything, right?
Yeah. One of the things I talk a lot about with my clients that are leaders is really around having a vision and a mission as a leader. And oftentimes, where imposter syndrome starts to seep in and they start to feel a lack of confidence and, a lack of being able to make strategic decisions and whatnot, is when they don't do their own personal work, right? So you mentioned, like, how do you motivate others? How do you understand others? Well, listen, you got a real good canvas in yourself to try that on, right? Like, you need to do the work to understand yourself. And when you do the work to understand yourself, you'll very easily understand what is your vision, what is your mission. And that is so important as a leader, I find, because I want to work for a leader that is very clear, that, like, I know exactly who I'm working for. I know why they care about their job. I know what they're trying to do. I know what their vision is, right? Because then I can say, yep, I'm in. Let's go. I'm into this vision. Like, I want to hitch my horse to your wagon. But when a leader is unclear, it's much harder for the team to rally around that leader.
Right. Well, the fact is, it's never been easier for leaders to do that work. And the simple way to do it is post on LinkedIn. What do you believe in? What's your point of view about management? What's your point of view about compensation, how you structure territories, how you develop individuals, how you help individuals improve? Put yourself out there. I mean, it's like, you could say, well, journal, right? You're never going to, as an individual, you're never going to understand these things unless you force yourself to reduce them to writing.
Totally.
And I mean, I firmly believe that. And so if you want to have a better understanding of yourself, put it in writing. So maybe start with a journal, but then post it on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
That's what it's there for, right? Is come to an understanding of yourself. I know this would make people cringe when they think, oh, you want me to go post my, I think, on LinkedIn?
The imposter syndrome that would show up for that.
That's right. But that's one of the things that you overcome.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like putting yourself in, challenging yourself every day, right? Putting yourself in a hard situation every single day, right? I think that's like maybe the David Goggins thing, or one of those people like say that. But I mean, LinkedIn is a very easy but hard thing to do every day. You know what I mean? Like putting yourself out there every day.
Sure. And you have that. I mean,
it's so available.
Posting on it for a long time, and I still occasionally feel it. I mean, publish a new book. Yeah, a new book coming out. I think by the time this airs, it'll be out. And it's like, I don't know, it's my third book, but you still have that moment where it's like, is everybody going to think I'm an idiot?
Yeah. I know. It's so funny. Because, like, no one is. Like, I'm so excited for your book. I'm like, Andy wrote a book. Of course I'm reading it,
Well, thank you. But but it's still there, right? Yeah. So, but the way we arm ourselves against, I was going to say shield, but we can't completely shield ourselves against it. The way you arm yourself against it is to have a point of view, put it out in public, let people respond to it, and continue to grow with it.
Yeah. I think there's this thing about fitting in, right? Like we've been kind of conditioned our whole lives to fit in, through schooling and whatnot, because fitting in means safety, right? Then you're a part of a, tribe or a community, or,
Hmm.
you fit in with the crowd, you're safe. And so, you just said point of view, which is why I'm bringing this up, right?
Sure.
I think people are afraid to have a point of view because will they fit in?
Well, but if they don't have a point of view, increasingly, then they're not going to get the job they want.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely.
I mean, if you're a hiring manager and you most certainly are looking at people's LinkedIn profiles to hire them for a job, especially a leadership position of any sort, maybe
Hmm.
even a frontline manager, if you're not promoting from within, which you should be, but if you're not, it's like, okay, who is this person? What do they stand for?
Exactly. What do you believe?
What do you believe? And if
Yeah.
they look at your LinkedIn profile and you believe seemingly nothing,
Hmm.
then you'll pale in comparison to the person that does
Has a point of view.
has a point
Totally.
of view.
I mean, everyone that I see on LinkedIn that's, creating a brand for themselves and a voice and has a point of view, I'm just like, oh, I'm in awe of you, because I only started really, sharing my point of view on LinkedIn when I started, being a full-time coach. And
Hmm.
it's honestly the one regret I have. So I talk about a lot on LinkedIn about how it took me 8 years to get to becoming a full-time coach, although I was like
Hmm.
trained 8 years ago as a coach, but I stayed
Right.
in corporate and it was hard to leave and la la la. I don't regret staying in corporate for those 8 years. I mean, my experience was,
Sure.
so useful, right? And I couldn't do what I'm doing now 8 years ago. Like there was just it went to work. But the one thing I do regret is I wish I started sharing my point of view on LinkedIn 8 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, imagine my audience by this point. You know, like,
Yeah, no, I share that sentiment. I mean, I started even later in life than you,
yeah,
and yeah, if there's again, I don't traffic in regrets very often,
right.
but if I
Me
have
neither.
one,
That's why it's like my only one.
yeah, if I had one, is I would have started doing this, uh, which could have been podcasting, yeah, posting on LinkedIn, writing books,
Yeah,
blogging, all of that. I would have
sharing.
sharing. I would have started sooner, but what the
Yeah.
heck? Better late than never.
Well, absolutely. Oh, I'm so happy that I do it. I mean, I've made so many amazing friends on
Hmm.
LinkedIn because they know who I am. They know
Yeah.
exactly what they're going to get when they talk to me. There's no surprise. And people that believe in what I believe, because that's what I talk about on LinkedIn, they're going to message me and they're going to want to, be my friend. And so it's created this entire community for me online that, like, now I'm going to one of their birthdays in Lisbon. Never even met them in person, but I'm going to their birthday in Lisbon.
I like that. Well, I was walking out on a walk early evening with my wife last week in San Diego, and someone said, "Hey, Andy." I'd never met them in person.
Yeah.
It's just they had seen my photo online.
Wow. You're big shot. You're big
No,
time.
it's such a big shot, but it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's someone I communicated with, and yeah, it
Yeah.
took 20 seconds or so to sort of place the connection. But it's like, yeah, it's basically a LinkedIn connection.
It really, like, it really shrinks the world in the nicest way possible. You know what I mean? Like, we're not that, like, separate and different and spread apart as you think.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So back to imposter syndrome. So I
Yeah.
just want to run through these five types because we've been talking about it, but it's fascinating. This is an article written by one named Valerie Young, and she
Hmm.
said five types. If one was the perfectionist, and there
Hmm.
is, based on other things I've read, is there is this tie between imposter syndrome and perfectionism
Hmm.
that people are
Big
just
time.
afraid they aren't measuring up,
Yeah.
right?
Because it's not perfect. It's
It's
not,
not perfect, right?
yeah.
So yeah, if you're a real perfectionist, heads up on that. The
Yeah.
second one was Superwoman, Superman.
Yeah.
People experience phenomena, convinced their phonies, have to push themselves harder to measure up. And so one question I had on that is just wondering, based on your practice, it would seem like, sort of given where we are and where we've been, is maybe women feel this more just acutely than men.
I definitely have more women clients than
Yeah.
men. Um, how I think about it is that there was like a study when I was getting certified in positive psychology. I remember we talked about this study around like women were asked like, what do you like, write down all the things that you feel like you need to be good at or something like that. Right. And they wrote like between 12 to 15 things on that piece of paper. And they asked, right.
Men.
And they
like
asked men,
right?
and the average was 3. Right.
Of course.
Classic. And so I think honestly, like that's the most illuminating piece of evidence that I have, which is like, I think women just like we've been programmed and we have a paradigm that was, programmed in us that says we have to be good at so many things. Like being good at 3 things is not enough. Right.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it sort of reminds me of posts from a woman who, whose name I'm blanking on. Tiffany Hempel from
yes.
And
she used to be at LinkedIn. Yeah.
Yeah. Who wrote about, in the midst of the pandemic, she identified she had 13 jobs.
Yeah.
And
mom and this.
Yeah.
Right.
The list for men was much shorter. So
exactly.
So yes, that would be understandable. And I think maybe some of that though too with, again, perhaps is men maybe lacks some of the, and this is not criticizing men, but I think just instinctively maybe lack some of the emotional intelligence to maybe feel inadequate in certain situations.
Yeah.
So
I think they,
we bluster through.
And I think because their metric system is just, it's 3 things. So if outside of those 3 things, they don't consider themselves bad at any, you know what I mean? Like where it's like, because there's so little things on that list, it's pretty easy to check them off. Now that like we're talking about it, I'm thinking about my male clients, and not one of them has shown up and been like, I'm exhausted. And every single one of my female clients show up and they're like, I'm exhausted. Every single one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah. Third. So we've been through the perfectionist to superwoman, Superman, the natural genius. We started touching on this is people feel they need to be naturally good at something, right?
Yeah.
As I said before, the examples, the connection part didn't come really super easy to me. And yeah, I know. Yeah, still to this day, I have friends that walk into a room full of strangers, social setting, business setting, whatever. Yeah, no issue with them at all. It's still hard work for me.
Yeah. But doesn't make you bad at it.
No, it doesn't make me bad. It's just
or ineffective at it. Yeah.
Definitely not ineffective at it. I just do it differently. And it took me a while in my career to get to the point saying like, oh yeah, okay. I don't really envy them. I just do it differently.
Yeah. Well, so what's interesting is like the kind of 3 universal wounds that we all kind of fall into. One of them is I'm not enough, which like is the crux of imposter syndrome.
Right.
But the other one is I'm different, right? Feeling like you're different than other people. So what you just described is that like, oh, well, I'm not naturally chatty, talkative, and charismatic, in crowds. So I'm different, and using that as like a reason to feel not good enough. Right. And not confident and all that kind of stuff. Right. I must not belong here because that doesn't come easy to me. Yeah. Which, like, by the way, isn't that always salespeople like, right? They have one bad month. They're like, well, I guess sales isn't for me,
Well, yeah, I've had more than one bad month, but still.
Well, early on in your sales career.
Yeah, early on.
Like the first one, you're like, well, see, I guess it's not for me. And you're like,
I
had
sort of this different take. And again, I talk about it in my book is just, I knew that the difference would be my superpower.
Which is?
Well, being more human focused.
Right.
And the things I describe in the book is, it wasn't, and I'm not salesy, right?
Yeah. Quintessentially.
But I was surrounded by people that were. And over time, just I sort of understood it's like, oh yeah, not being that way is actually my advantage.
Well, that's the thing. It's like people take I'm different as a negative, but it's actually always your superpower.
Yeah, precisely.
Right? Yeah. It's like just the lens that you look at it from.
Well, and I think that's one of the things we can do as leaders is to give people permission to look through those lenses.
Mm-hmm. And show them a different perspective too.
Right. And show them a different perspective. And again, that's not to be too overly self-promotional, but again, I talk about that specifically in the book is that leaders have to feel comfortable giving their sellers more autonomy to view things differently and to be different and to be less rigid in expecting people to comply to a certain process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember having reps that, felt different. Like, well, I don't do it that way. And, that's not how, and I would be like, I know, that's why I hired you, like, that's your talent. Like, yeah, it's great that you don't do it like them. Who cares what they're doing?
Well, but that's, again, it's, if you've got the syndrome now, if managers, who don't have a ton of experience themselves, but also haven't been trained and enabled the right way, they feel threatened by that oftentimes, or fearful about it because they know
how do I manage this different person?
Right. How do I manage this different person? And what if it affects their numbers?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. The numbers, always the numbers.
Yeah. So I would always sort of put it to a boss is say, well, hold me accountable for performing, but I'm going to do it my way.
Right there with you, Andy. I was always very upfront about who I was as a leader in all of my interviews. Like if you want like a numbers driven, metrics driven, someone that manages that way, don't hire me straight up. Yeah. I'm not going to be that person. I am always going to focus on the people, and the people will take care of my business. That's all I care about.
Yeah. Well, yes, I was pretty much the same way. I have a story in the book about a manager got sort of frustrated with me because, I'd be open to suggestion, open to ideas, but I always would process and say, okay, is this going to fit what I want? So it never came across as blind obedience, which is what some managers like. Because my perspective was, well, I could go do what you want, but if it doesn't work out, I don't hit my numbers, who gets fired, me or you?
Right.
So if it's going to be me, I'm going to go out on my own terms. And so this was one boss, my typical answer to him was, well, that's interesting. Let me think about that.
Yeah. They probably didn't like that so much.
No. Yeah. One day, certain frustration, he goes, don't you ever just say yes to anything? The answer was no. So, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Alli, it's been great to have you on the show. If people want to learn more about the services you offer and what you do, how should they do that?
Absolutely. So where I hang out most is LinkedIn. So just Alli Rizacos. And then my website as well has, what I offer, my one-on-one coaching and testimonials, all that kind of good stuff, which is just allirizacos.com.
Perfect. All right. And hope you enjoy the rest of your time in Hilton Head or Del Boca Vista.
Yeah, the Del Boca Vista of South Carolina. Yeah, about to go have a little cocktail by the pool. So should be a nice little Friday.
Sounds good. All right.
Yeah.
Alli, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, as always, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. So grateful for your support of the show. And I want to thank my guest, Alli Rizacos, for sharing her insights with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. So thank you for your help, and thank you so much for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.